The Oort Perimeter, Chapter 11. Nordum paced anxiously back and forth across the floor. "Why your impatience, Chancellor? You seem worried about something," said a councilwoman. "There's just something nagging at the back of my mind. The Syrian delegates, their Juna bosses, the restlessness within the Varnok, and the growing hatred of humans that came out of nowhere, and seems to be permeating the entire galaxy. It's like there's an explanation there that I just can't quite wrap my mind around yet," he said. "Would it be something we could do anything about if you could?" she asked. Nordum shrugged. "It's possible, but I don't know. If nothing else, it'd give us a better idea of who we're dealing with." "What of the spies we sent out recently?" asked Mike. "We likely won't hear anything from them for several months." "Who'd you send out?" asked the councilwoman. "Lars Nordic, Vladimir Umnov, Antonio Garcia and Bob Landers. They're 4 of the best operatives I have in the intelligence corps," said Nordum. "They went out on the Appalachia and the Onagai, both of which are ship killers with good crews who are well known to me," said Mike. "The Appalachia? That's Commander Toby's ship, isn't it?" asked the councilman. "It is. He's one of my best commanders, and a seasoned recon expert. That's why I chose him for this mission," said Mike. The councilwoman smiled approvingly. "I've heard many good things about him. He was a good choice. However, I disagree with your choice for the operatives on this mission, Chancellor. I can understand your decision to send Antonio Garcia and Bob Landers, but Lars and Vlad are planet-side experts. Wouldn't they be more useful in keeping tabs on the various shadow organizations operating here at home on Earth?" she asked. Nordum shook his head. "We don't need them here right now." "Why is that?" "Because they've pretty much put all of those groups, including Black Orchid, out of action for the foreseeable future. So, since it'll be a while before any of them get back on their feet again, I thought that it'd be a good idea to give Lars and Vladimir something new to work on for a while. No point having them atrophy from boredom." The councilwoman nodded. "That does make logical sense," she replied. "Ma'am, I know my place isn't diplomacy, even though I get roped into it regularly, but I was curious what our stance is with the Gaic Fawn. What is their take on this recent rise of hatred against Earth and the galactic body? Someone's got to be instigating this, because nobody has ever really hated us before this, save for the Juna, and that's only because we prevented them from exploiting Earth," said Mike. "And killed their top leaders," said Nordum. "Actually, it was the Gaic Fawn who killed them. We only tangled briefly with one of their ships and nearly got our shorts handed to us in the process. But even so, do you have any ideas on this situation, Councilwoman?" The woman sighed. "Not really. Have you heard anything yet from our allies?" Nordum shook his head. "I've been asking, but haven't really been getting many answers. I'm just as concerned with this turn of events as you and the Admiral are. Mostly because, while the Gaic Fawn will do everything they can to protect us, if push comes to shove, they're going to concentrate on protecting their own people first if things come to blows, which is to be expected. But that'll leave us high and dry if it does happen." "Yes, and that leaves me in a bit of a lurch as well. While our defenses are formidable, they're not impregnable. Even with the upgraded Oort Perimeter, as well as our expanded military forces, we'll only be able to delay the inevitable for a short time should someone attack us with significant forces," said Mike. "Agreed. So right now our best defense is to play the political gambit and try to resolve this issue before it gets out of hand," said the councilman. "Honestly, there really is no better plan, as a military solution should always be the last option under any situation. So Phyland on Cebius, and our 4 operatives out on recon, are our best chance right now of solving this mystery. And, until I hear something definitive from them, I'm not going to move in any one particular direction. The last thing we need is to jump to conclusions and then later discover that they got us further into trouble. I know this seems like the overly cautious approach to an ever-growing problem, but handling galactic politics is no different than walking in a minefield. If you move too fast, you're guaranteed to get your leg blown off," said Nordum. The members of the council discussed this briefly between themselves for several minutes as Nordum and Mike watched, patiently waiting for an answer. Eventually one of them turned to the two men, and said, "We've decided to defer to your judgment on this for now. You seem to have a better grasp of the situation than we do. In turn, we will try and find solutions to this problem here at home. Together we might be able to formulate a plan that will save Earth from what is quickly becoming a hopeless, and ultimately nightmarish future." Mike nodded. "We'll let you know as soon as we find anything useful. We eagerly await your report." Corbin looked down at the data pad in his hand, and then looked up at the holographic avatar of Phyland. "So this is why the Gfondonok can't use EUTDs," he said. "According to Finch it is. He showed this to me earlier today while we were discussing his use of PUTs. I was rather surprised to learn that he had a complete anatomical breakdown of his species with him. I'm guessing he'd brought it along in hopes of finding someone who might be able to help them solve their problem. It's the only reason I can think of for why he'd be carrying around something like that with him." Yes, I agree. But is this all of the medical information they have on their species, or just the primer?" Phyland shrugged. "Regrettably, that's all of it. Fondos are a good species, but their science seems to be lacking in some areas, and yet excels in others. For example, while they're experts at aviation technology, they're severely deficient in their medical sciences. I can't really make sense of why that is. But it's pretty obvious that their scientific priorities are vastly different from our own, much as ours are different from the other races around us." Phyland's holographic avatar flickered briefly, and then stabilized. But Corbin didn't take any notice of this. He instead focused on the data pad in front of him. "That's to be expected, I guess. Either way, I'll talk with the chief medical officer and see if he might be interested in tackling this. I think we both know that the answer to that will be a resounding yes, but it's always polite to ask before assuming anything." Phyland smiled. "Thanks, I owe you one." Corbin nodded, then glared slightly at Phyland. "Solve our political problems and we'll call it even." Phyland chuckled. "Deal." Lars stumbled onto the bridge in a groggy stupor and looked around in confusion. "Ah, the sleepyhead is awake, I see," said Toby. Lars squinted as he tried to make out the bridge around him. Then he noticed something over the windows. "What is that?" he asked groggily. "Huh? What is what?" asked Toby. "That weird brown stuff over the windows," said Lars. "Oh, that. Haven't you seen holographic cloaking before?" Lars cocked his head in curiosity. Toby's chief engineer chuckled. "I'd take that as a no, sir," he said with a smile. Lars squinted in disgust. "You woke me out of a sound sleep to show me some little parlor trick your ship can do," he grunted. "Actually, no. But that is part of why we called you up here. Chief, would you kindly show our guest a top-down image of our ship in its present state?" "Aye, sir," came the reply. A few seconds later a holographic map appeared in front of Lars showing a blinking red dot surrounded by dozens of blinking blue dots bordered by two scrolling dotted yellow lines that passed in a weaving, wandering path through a large field of glistening stars. Lars studied it for a few moments, trying to understand what he was seeing, and then went wide-eyed as his mind finally understood what he was looking at. "We're in the trade lanes," he said in surprise. "Aye. We just entered them about 14 minutes ago. So far everything's been as normal as one could expect." "How fast are we traveling?" "About warp 7 by the galactic scale. It's the locally accepted speed limit for the trade lanes. So in order to blend in, we've achieved an equivalent speed. Wait a second. If memory serves me right, isn't that too fast for our cloaking? To allow for proper silent running, aye. For normal operations, nay. And for instances of holographic stealth, that's definitely not true." Lars cocked his head in curiosity as he dismissed the map. "What exactly is this holographic cloaking you keep mentioning?" he asked. Holographic cloaking is a stealth system that uses holograms and specially tailored energy emissions to hide the true identity of a vessel. With it we can mimic the appearance, shape, size, and energy footprint of any ship in the galaxy equal to or larger than our own. It essentially allows us to hide in plain sight without drawing undue attention to ourselves, said the chief engineer. Lars pondered this briefly. So, whatever ship we want to mimic with this that hologram thing, we can match their visual and sensor cross-section, right down to the very warp's signature and everything? Toby nodded. Aye, lad, we can. So we literally look exactly like whoever it is we're mimicking? Aye, we do. Is that safe? Asked Lars. Completely safe. We've used it hundreds of times before. We're currently using one of our favorite holographic coverings, which is a Type 2 Fringe Trader de Gavo class cargo vessel. Since they're independent trading ships, they carry no registry and minimal identification. Normally they're the ones responsible for transporting raw ores and other materials from the galactic fringes to the inner core, and finished goods from the inner core to the outer fringes. Few bother them, or get in their way, because to survive on the galactic fringes, you have to be a tough, hardened tradesman with nothing to lose. So anyone tangling with them typically comes out the worse for it, paying a very heavy price in crew and ship, even if they do succeed in capturing one of these vessels. Therefore, since they're so feared and respected, it's the perfect disguise for us to use in order to minimize the chances of someone getting too nosy or trying to attack us. Lars cocked an eyebrow. I guess that explains the rather unusual costumes we were given for this mission. Toby chuckled. Aye, that it would, lad. That it would. So how long until our first stop? Speaking of which, what is our first stop? Toby looked at Lars in curious surprise. I thought you already knew that. Lars shook his head. They told me what to expect, not where we were going. They said you'd know that, and all I had to do was find some answers once we got there. Toby looked at his chief engineer, and then his tactical officer in surprise. Finally he looked back at Lars, and said, I would think that the intelligence corps would have better prepared you. I normally deal with problems planetside. We rarely get out here often enough to be bothered with galactic politics or espionage. Up until now, that's been left up to you recon guys. My understanding was that this would be no different than any of my other missions against Black Orchid or the Illuminati. Toby whistled as he rubbed his head. No laddie, they're not the same. Galactic espionage and politics are worlds different than what we have back on Earth. There are some similarities, but those are few. The chief engineer rolled his eyes. It figures that Intel would screw this up again, he said. And we need to fix it before we go much further. He motioned to the door of the bridge, and said, Come with me, lad. I need to bring you up to speed on how things work out here, and most especially on this cesspool of a trading post we're due to arrive at in the next few hours. After that, I think we need to complain to our respective superiors about this monumental screw-up. Lars snorted. To be honest, it sounds pretty par for the course. Toby frowned. That's the problem. With as much as your bosses screw things up, it's amazing we get anything productive done. Lars snorted. No kidding. Phylan stepped into his office and brushed past Julian, who stumbled slightly and dropped the large stack of data pads he was carrying. Phylan grimaced, but kept walking. Clean it up, Julius, he shouted as he slipped into his office and closed the door behind him. Mary smiled at Julius, feeling sorry for his predicament. She got up from her desk and helped him gather up all the pads. Thanks, I appreciate it, said Julius with a hint of nervousness. Mary laughed. The silly old coot ought to be kinder to you. Brushing up against you like that, and then blaming you for the mess was just uncalled for, she said. No, it's all right. I'm a klutz anyways. Mary chuckled kindly. Yes, but you're a cute klutz. Julius looked curiously at her as she winked at him playfully and then slipped back to her desk. In his office, Phylan placed his palm onto an empty square on his desk and muttered a quick access code. The desk then beeped as a large holographic display appeared above it moments later. He punched in several access codes and the required authorization keys, and then waited for the transmission to connect. Several moments later Nordham's image appeared on the display. Phylan, How's life in the big scary galactic senate, he said chidingly. Phylan rolled his eyes. You don't want to know. That bad, replied Nordum with a grin. I've been arguing with the Ahaktak ambassador all morning. You'd think that walking throw rug would get a clue by now, said Phylan. They are pests, aren't they? Phylan rolled his eyes. That's an understatement, he muttered. So, what do you have for me today? Phylan sighed. Other than the usual, not much. It's like I'm suddenly taboo around here or something. Don't talk to the token human. You might get rabies or something. Or at least that seems to be the attitude of most of the ambassadors lately. The only ones really willing to talk to me anymore are the Gaic Fawn, the Fondos, the Sevedith, the Yandians, and a handful of others. Well, and the Ahaktak, but I don't count them. Fondos? Asked Nordum. The Gaic Fawn call them the Gfondona. Fondo is their nickname. Ah, that's the bird species you told me about a couple months ago. You also said you'd made friends with one of them. Yeah, his name's Finch. He's their newest ambassador. Him and I became fast friends shortly after he came here a few years ago. Finch? Phylan grinned. It's the nickname I gave him. Since everyone around here has such a problem pronouncing his real name, most have just settled with using nicknames when addressing him. Speaking of which, we've just gained a new nickname ourselves. We're now fondly known as the Chapaji. I've been hearing it with increasing frequency around here lately. Chapaji? Yeah, that's come up in a few reports around here too. What's it mean? Phylan frowned. Apparently it's alien slang for fecal matter from what I've been able to gather. Or possibly its less desirable counterpart. Nordum furrowed his brow. Well, at least they didn't call us mutant monkeys or something. Phylan smirked. I wouldn't put it past them. No, I doubt you would. So, do you have any other useful information for me? It's unlikely you called simply to chit-chat, said Nordum. You're correct on that point. I do have something, but I'm not sure how useful it is. What is it? There's talk of a group that's connected with the Juna who might be responsible for all our current problems. Nordum perked up in interest. Really? Who? The Syrians? Actually, no. In all honesty, I don't know who they are. All I know is that the group exists, or at least I'm 90% certain of it. But the name I keep hearing makes no sense. A number of the diplomats keep secretly referring to them as the Ranpak or the Tifar, which roughly translates to World of Savages, depending on the language. And I emphasize the word roughly. I've been working on this with our Gaic Fawn counterparts and even they're stumped. I would have tossed it away as just another slang word for humans if it hadn't caught the interest of the Gaic Fawn ambassador so much. He seems genuinely intrigued by it. So him and his assistant ambassadors are listening around, trying to catch someone talking about it in hopes that it might lend them a clue. Nordum rubbed his chin in thought. You're certain this isn't yet another slang term for Earth, right? I'm positive. As I mentioned, the Gaic Fawn have taken a great interest in this. Especially since the races that hate and fear us think of us as the coming destroyers. If they were to call us savages, it'd be more as a statement of mockery rather than fear, as we would be of little concern to them at that point. So we think it refers to someone else working in the shadows to shake up the power base for as yet unknown reasons. I know it's not much to go on, but depending on what you run across back there, it might prove useful. Nordum inhaled deeply, and then sighed heavily. Its usefulness remains to be seen. For all we know, this new name may have intentionally been placed out there to send us down a rabbit hole and away from the truth. Or, as you suggested, perhaps even mock us. I understand that, but right now it's really the only thing we have to go on. True. I guess it's better to go on a wild goose chase than sit here and do nothing. All right, I'll pass this on to my directors and we'll see what we come up with. Hopefully we gain something useful out of this. Phylan nodded. So do I.